Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 32, Alma 53 through 63, Preserved by His Marvelous Power. This is part 2 of Lesson 32. We have another double episode for you with Jason Mao, who has spoken at many events, conferences, and now is a seminary teacher in Arizona. In addition to the military and police training, he has a bachelor's degree in education. He has spoken with youth all over the United States. In 2006, Jason took time off from his law enforcement career and worked as a civilian contractor for the U.S. government in Afghanistan. It was in Afghanistan that the first ideas for what would become the War Chapters series began to form. After a rocket attacked on his base in Herat, he turned to the scriptures and found comfort in reading about the experiences of Captain Moroni. He wrote these scenes as they played out in his mind all throughout his time there.
Welcome, everybody. We have a fantastic amount of information to share with you. And I have with us again is Jason Mao, and we have him joining us here by internet. And we're covering Alma chapters 53 to 63. I love this. Moroni's epistle to Amaron on the Eastern Front said, I would tell you somewhat concerning the justice of God and the sword of his almighty wrath, which doth hang over you, except you repent and withdraw your armies into your own lands. I mean, he just tells it like it is. You know what? Either you withdraw, or God's going to smite you. It's interesting that he's not telling we're going to smite you. He says God's going to smite you.
That's another key about who this guy was. Never once in any of the epistles or any of his sayings or any of his actions did he go, I did this.
Yeah.
He always said, we won because of God, or my men accomplished this mission. Never once did he take credit for anything. And think of all the amazing things he was able to do. Yeah. Every time he had a chance to say something, it was always because of our faithfulness, because God fights our battles, because we're on his side. Yeah. It's not because of our arms or our weapons, our technology. It's because we are followers of Christ and he fights our battles for us.
Yeah. I love that. Verse 9, and now behold, this is again chapter 54, verse 9. Now behold, we are prepared to receive you. Yea, and except you withdraw your purposes, behold, ye will pull down the wrath of that God whom ye have rejected upon you, even to your utter destruction. I mean, and then later on in verse 11, he says, thou art a child of hell. I mean, this is a guy that doesn't mince words. I mean, here's a guy who their main purpose is to come and destroy their civilization. They could easily just stay in their lands and be happy, but no, they have to come in and they have to try to destroy what the Nephites have developed and what they have built up. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why he's calling him a child of hell. That's pretty strong language.
Well, it's descriptive, it's simple, and it's to the point. He's a soldier, and that's how we speak.
Yeah.
We don't have the luxury of mincing our words.
Yep.
You know, you're a child of hell. Go away. Leave us alone to live in peace, or I'm going to kill you. Right? Yep. It doesn't get much simpler than that.
And the Lord is going to basically put you in our hands if you don't. Now, this is another interesting thing, though. He basically wants to make a deal. He'll exchange the prisoners. They've got all these prisoners. They have to basically feed and clothe these guys. They can't just let them die, and so forth. And so the Lamanites have a bunch of prisoners too. And he says, okay, well, we'll just trade you one for one. One prisoner for one of our prisoners. But a lot of their prisoners are women and children, because Moroni and his men didn't take women and children because it was their army that he was taking. So Moroni says, nothing doing. I mean, this is guy, he's a good negotiator. He reminds me a little bit of President Trump, I guess, when it comes down to it, He said, I heard about the Air Force One thing, He said, no, I'm not going to pay $5 billion for Air Force One, planes. The number's got to have a 3 in front of it. Anyway, but here he's negotiating with him. He says, okay, it shows you, first off, they don't have women and children to even negotiate with. The Nephites don't. But the Lamanites have taken prisoners of women and children because they've been attacking what? The Nephite cities. So they have this. And so Moroni says, well, you know what? We're going to go ahead. For one of your men, we want a man-for-man exchange. And if that man has a wife and children, then basically we get the wife and children along with that man. And basically, at first, I think he says no, but then he says, well, you know what? Actually, it's not such a bad idea because we're having to feed these women and children too, so let them feed them. So he finally agrees to the deal. This is Amram's reply, and I think this is really telling about Amram's reply here in verse 16. He says, I am Amram, the king of the Lamanites. I am the brother of Amalickiah, whom ye have murdered. Behold, I will avenge his blood upon you, yea, and I will come upon you with my armies, for I fear not your threatenings. Verse 17, for behold, your fathers did wrong their brethren, insomuch that they did rob them of their right to the government when it rightly belonged unto them. Now, isn't that an interesting thing?
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with them today. It had to do with, generations ago, your fathers robbed us. Boy, does that sound familiar? There are so many different people who think, well, we were robbed because of this or because of that, one thing or the other. But it has nothing to do with them today. They're just trying to use it as an excuse to basically have hatred in their hearts for other people.
Yeah, they've been taught to conditional hatred for something that didn't even happen to them. Yeah,
so they're trying to get reparations for something that had nothing to do with their particular lives, and they said that they stole their government. Well, the Lamanites had their own government. They just didn't have the Nephites under them. Really, what they wanted to have was more subjects.
Right.
And so it wasn't enough to have just their own subjects.
It's also an avenue of excuse. If you're not able to, or you don't want to produce something, you can blame that problem on somebody else. If only we had some sort of saying that we could teach the children, some sort of thing, and one of them says, I blame no one for my faults and I give thanks for my abilities. So one of the things the Lamanites were doing is blaming their existence on this life on the Nephites, because they weren't the ones that were the king. This goes all the way back to Nephi and Laman and Lemuel. Yeah. They think that they were wrongly taken from their birthright, and they were wrongly taken from Jerusalem and all of that. And so they spend the next 600 years blaming a Nephite for something that happened 600 years ago, but the information was incorrect to begin with. That's not what happened. So they've been lied to, and they've been manipulated, and they've been coerced into generationally hating people for something that actually didn't happen. And they're getting wrong information. Yeah. Now, who is the father of all lies? Who wants to set these people up to be miserable their entire lives based on a lie? Satan.
Yeah.
We need to be very careful when we listen to people complain about something that happened hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and start wanting to be treated a certain way because something happened 1,000 years ago. No, it's the content of your character. It's not what happened 1,000 years ago. It's not the color of your skin. It's who you are as a person. That's how you're going to be judged.
That's exactly right. And verse 23 says that I am Amram, and am a descendant of Zoram, whom your fathers pressed and brought out of Jerusalem. Well, he made the choice. At that point when the boys were leaving Jerusalem with the plates and so forth, he decided. They said, well, you can come and stay with us, kind of thing. And he said, well, okay, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Actually, I think the choice was die or come with us, though. So it wasn't exactly an easy choice, probably, but anyway. He says, behold, now I am a bold Lamanite. Behold, this war hath been waged to avenge our wrongs, and to maintain and to obtain the rights to government, and close my epistle with Moroni. So chapter 55, Amram had a perfect knowledge of his fraud. He knew this whole thing was a fraud, but he's just working up the Lamanites to try to get them to come against the Nephites here. And he knew that Amram knew that this was not a just cause, that he had caused him to wage war against the people of Nephi. It's not a just cause. It's kind of like the war that's been going on the police forces around the United States recently. It's not a just cause. There's so much reason to show that are there officers who make bad decisions, and there are maybe even bad officers, but the vast majority are not. But they're portrayed now in the media as if they are some kind of organization that needs to be done away with. Yeah. But I find it fascinating that there are a group of people who want to take away the Second Amendment rights of Americans to bear arms, basically to have guns and so forth. They say, well, we need to take that away. You don't need guns because we have the police. So if you have a problem, all you got to do is dial 911 and you got the police right there, right? That's the argument against having guns. But then what happens then when the same people basically say, oh, and by the way, we need to abolish the police too? Well, what does that lead to? It leads to complete anarchy. It leads to the coming forth of lawlessness, and this cannot turn out good for people when they refuse to obey the laws.
The only people that want the sheep to be afraid of the sheepdogs are the wolves. So we need to be very careful about who we're listening to. And nobody on this earth hates a bad cop more than a good cop. I know this, and I have personally put my hands on bad cops. I've personally put my handcuffs on bad cops. Nobody hates them more than a good cop does. And statistically speaking, incidences of misconduct are lower than any other profession, including doctors and the clergy, when it comes to law enforcement. But for some reason, we're focused, like as a country, like a laser beam, on the one group of people that have sworn their lives in defense of your freedoms.
And
now,
it's actually just an absolute travesty what's been going on here, because these good men and women put their lives on the line. I can't even imagine having to go to work every day to get a paycheck that basically you don't know for sure if you're going to come home at night. Your wife wonders if you're going to be coming home at night. You might be in a body bag, you might be down at the morgue, or you might be just in a hospital someplace, horribly injured. This is not just your regular job where you have, like if you get your hand stuck in a machine or something that might kick your hand off. These are intelligent individuals who basically many times want to do harm to you just because you're part of the thin blue line,
Simply because I have that uniform on. They don't know anything about me. They don't even know my name, where I grew up, what my economic status is, nothing. Just simply because I'm wearing that badge, they want to kill me.
And they don't get paid a lot either, as you probably can attest to, right?
Oh, police officers?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, compared to a lot of other jobs and so forth, I mean, you take a look at programmers and so forth. Well, they're not putting their life on the line all day long. Even firefighters, they occasionally put their life on the line, but the fires aren't out to kill them. The fires are there, and they're trying to avoid getting killed by the fire. But there's not intelligent, fire trying to actually take them out.
The fire doesn't look out the window and go, I'm going to jump out and kill that fireman right there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and I know this is going to be released in a couple of months, and it's June right now, and so we're still dealing with. We have no idea what's going to be going on when this is released, but we're still dealing with those knuckleheads in Seattle that have Chaz, that little autonomous zone right now. They kicked out the cops and declared it a free state, and the first thing they did was throw up walls and put in armed guards. So if you think that the communists if you think that the socialists are about freedom, just look at what's happening in those 6 blocks. The first thing they did was throw up walls, put armed guards, and check IDs about who can come and who can go.
Yeah.
So be very, very careful about the people that try to convince you that the sheepdogs are dangerous.
Exactly. That's very well put. And it's just such a travesty that we're seeing this going on in our nation, that basically some city leaders and state leaders really refuse to uphold those who we as a people have put in place to uphold the laws, because they're basically lawless. They don't want to uphold the laws, and they don't want to have to go through the effort of changing the laws to their liking, so that rather they'll just ignore the laws.
We're just as guilty because we've allowed our electoral system to become not a political process, but a popularity contest. Mm-hmm. We're not electing good and wise and just men like we've been commanded to in this book. Like the last two Christian civilizations that occupied this land fell down and were destroyed the exact same way, because they refused to follow God's laws. They refused to have honest, moral, upright people representing them, and they refused to take personal responsibility.
Yep.
That's exactly what's playing out word for word today, what happened to the last two civilizations.
Yeah, and the Book of Mormon is the parallel history. It's the foreshadowing of of what is going on in our day, because it was written by Mormon who saw our day. Jesus Christ showed him to us. He knew what we were going to be doing, and he basically pulled out from their records the things that we were going to need. And basically, we're getting right to the point here between where we're at right now in Alma, through Helaman, and then into basically into 3rd Nephi. This is the wind-up scene to the destruction. This is what's happening right before Christ comes to the Nephites. This is what's going to be happening when Christ comes to America, and back to his promised land here. I want to point out a couple of other things here in chapter 55. Verse 4 says, "And now it came to pass that when Moroni had said these words, he caused that a search should be made among his men, that perhaps he might find a man who was a descendant of Laman among them. It came to pass that they found one whose name was Laman, and he was one of the servants of the king who was murdered by Amalickiah." Why would they go and look for a descendant of Laman?
Because they wanted somebody that looked like the other Lamanites to infiltrate the lines and trick them.
That's right. Yeah. Which also I think tells us, I think this indicates that the whole thing about skin color of the Lamanites and the Nephites was actually a real deal. It was actually a difference that they could actually visibly see who was a Nephite and who was a Lamanite. And again, if you heard some of the very early podcasts, the speculation that I've had is that basically when the Nephites got here, they found Asiatic people, and they began to intermarry with them, and that caused some of the darker features, dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, and so forth, which are dominant genetically, that those began to be more pronounced in the Lamite population because they broke their covenant to marry outside of their kindred, which is what they talk about in the Hebrew tradition. Laman calls a small number of his men that could go with him. Then he brought him wine. Now this is good wine, apparently. We have taken of their wine and brought it with us. So he said. So he basically poses as a Lamanite who's gotten some wine from the Nephites, and we escaped from the Nephites, and they sleep. And behold, we've taken their wine and brought it with us. And the Lamanites were very happy to partake of the wine, and they got drunk. Now, interestingly enough, wine is made from what plant?
That would be the grape.
The grape. That's right. And interestingly enough, grapes, there are 3 different kinds of grapes. This is on page 327 of the Annotated Book of Mormon. Originally, America was called Vinland, or land of wine. There's 3 different kinds of grapes: white, red, and what they call green grapes. And those 3 kinds of grapes are actually indigenous to North America. Interestingly enough, though, Jason, Central America, no grapes.
Well, that's not possible because that's where it took place.
So when you think about that, now they did have this giant.
Are you saying that grapes only grow in a Mediterranean-style atmosphere and they don't grow in the subtropics? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Basically, that's what the grapes like to do. They like to hang out in that area.
They like the sunshine and the fresh air and the.
Yeah, they don't really like that full-time humidity. They need to have a cold season. They need to have some opposition. they need to have it get cold enough so that they basically back off in the fall, and the energy basically goes back down into the roots, and then in the spring they springs back up, and it causes the grapes to form. Anyways, but land of wine, Vinland. Interesting because there is wine here, and it would be readily available. In fact. All throughout the Midwest, there's vineyards. Lamanite guards become drunk with the wine, and then they are able to get out, even to the women and children, and so forth. They said so they got out. So Nephite prisoners were freed from the city of Gid, and then the city of Gid is taken. Then Moroni prepares to attack the city of Morianton. Chapter 56, Helaman's epistle to Moroni. And this is where he's talking about that Helaman was now placed in charge of the 2,000 stripling warriors. He then writes a letter from Helaman to Moroni describing his experience with these 2,000 sons, the people of Amoron. And he says, I did march forth, this is in verse 9, behold, here is one thing in which we may have great joy. For behold, in the 26th year, I, Helaman, did march forth at the head of these 2,000 young men to the city of Judea to assist Antipas, whom ye had appointed as leader over the people of that part of the land. And he joined his 2,000 sons to them. In verse 11, nevertheless, we may console ourselves in this point, that they have died in the cause of their country and of their God, yea, and they are happy. This is a vast number of men who have been slain, but not of the 2,000 warriors. Talk about the city of Manti and so forth. And then do you want to tell us a little bit more about these 2,000 warriors and Helaman's feelings towards them?
This is really amazing that he was able to take these kids that had absolutely no military training whatsoever and turn them into a fighting unit. And not only that, he was able to deploy them in such a way and use them in such a way that they were able to overcome vastly superior numbers. That just doesn't happen. What happened in the story is a straight up miracle. Because if you think about it, these boys had never trained with a weapon. They didn't. I mean, they were raised in a Zion-like society by true converts to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and so they didn't fight. They didn't argue. They weren't trained to fight. They never held a weapon before, and yet they went out to fight people like me that have spent my entire life preparing for war in one aspect or another. These Lamanites, they were a warlike people. That's all that was their occupation, was war. Mm-hmm. And so they knew that going out. And their parents also knew that because they used to be Lamanites. So they had no reservations or no hesitations in knowing exactly who they were going to face and what they're capable of, because their parents used to be bloodthirsty like those Lamanites. And so their parents allowed them to do this. Basically said, hey, take your weapon. You don't know anything. Go out there and serve your country. I know exactly what you're going to be facing. So there's no illusions that there was going to be a cakewalk for these kids.
Well, where do they get that kind of courage and that strength, that moral courage to be able to do this and even come against these hardened, battle-hardened individuals of the Lamanites, and they were basically fearless.
But they got that courage from the teachings of their parents.
Yeah.
Their fathers had to go out, just like the proclamation of the family. Their fathers were responsible for the temporal welfare of the family. So they had to go out and they had to gather the food. They had to tend to the animals and the flocks and build the houses. Mm-hmm. So the education happened in the home, and the education came primarily from the mothers. And the mothers taught them, the fathers taught them the right and wrong, and the mothers taught them to love God and to trust God. And they knew this. It wasn't a casual conversation that they had. They knew this, and they believed their mothers. And so they were willing to stand and fight because their mothers told them that they would be okay. Their mothers told them they would be blessed of God, and he would take care of them if they were faithful. And so they found that courage based on the example of their parents. Now, again, type and shadow of today. We talked about this before, that President Nelson looked at these kids 2 years ago in his worldwide devotional to the youth and said, it's time for you to join the Lord's youth battalions in the armies of God. So a man of science and religion is using a military term to describe what he's looking for from the youth today. He is calling up God's army. He's calling up the stripling warriors, the modern day stripling warriors. So if our children are the modern day stripling warriors, then guess who we are? The parents of the modern day stripling warriors. So what's our responsibility? It's right here. It's right there in the scriptures, to lead them, to guide them, to train them, to give them the examples, to be a covenant making and a covenant keeping people, so that when our children have to face the enemy, they can look at our examples of success.
Yeah, I just love a couple of these verses here, and again, this is chapter 56, and it says verse 45. This is again Helaman writing to Moroni, explaining what has been happening here. He says, and now I say unto you, my beloved brother Moroni, that never have I seen so great courage, nay, not amongst all the Nephites. Now, these are guys that have fought together side by side, and he's saying, I've never seen anybody with so much courage. Go ahead.
Think about this. Think about a 15-year-old boy that you know. It could be your son, your brother, your nephew, your cousin, any of their friends, that awkward little kid that hands you the sacrament every Sunday, the one that can never remember to wear a belt. Think about these kids, right? Now, think about them facing me in hand-to-hand combat. I am a trained professional. I've been at this for over 30 years. I hold 2 instructorships in different martial arts. I have been to war. I train people to fight. This is what I have done.
Yeah.
Can you imagine me and that 15-year-old boy having at each other with our bare hands, and him having the courage to stand there and see me running at him full tilt with a giant metal object in my hand with a pointy end on it, with bloodlust in my eyes, screaming, I'm going to kill you. And he has to stand there. There is courage there that we don't understand because you don't see it. You've never experienced that. But that level of courage is unprecedented. And Helaman makes a point of pointing that out to Moroni. And Mormon put that in there because that little verse wouldn't change the overall trajectory of the Book of Mormon. But that verse was so important that our children today, needed to know that they have to stand and show courage in the face of an enemy that has never been seen in this generation before.
Wow.
This is a type and shadow for our day.
Yep. In fact, they said unto me, Father, behold, our God is with us, and he will not suffer that we should fall. Then let us go forth. We would not slay our brethren if they would let us alone. Therefore let us go, lest they should overpower the army of Antipas. Now they never had fought, ever. They never had fought, yet they did not fear death. And they did think more upon the liberty of their fathers than they did upon their own lives. Yea, they had been taught by their mothers, that if they did not doubt, God would deliver them. And they rehearsed unto me the words of their mothers, saying, now this is interesting because we don't know exactly what the punctuation here was exactly, but these are the words. We do not doubt, our mothers knew it. Now my question is, did they say, we do not doubt because our mothers knew it, or we do not doubt that our mothers knew it? I think it's the first. Yeah. We don't doubt because we know our mothers knew it.
They trusted their mothers, that they knew that their mothers were a covenant-making and a covenant-keeping people. Mm-hmm. They knew that their mothers were true converts to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Their mothers would not send them down the wrong road. Their mothers said, stand and be not moved, and God will protect you. And that's what they did.
So how important do you think then, I mean, mothers in general are? I mean, as somebody who has actually observed combat and so forth, I mean, what value are mothers in our society, really?
Mothers, women are the linchpin to society. You literally hold humanity in your arms. Now think about this for a second. The God of heaven and earth, he created this beautiful place, and after he had made the horses and the dolphins and the kittens and the rainbows and the mountains and all the things that we find beautiful in this world, we're taught that he personally came down on this earth and supervised the creation of man. And after he created man, he said, it's not done. My most important, my most perfect, the key to this entire plan isn't on this earth. And then he created woman, and he put in woman the power of creation. There was only one creature in all of God's creation that was strong enough to contain this power within them, and that was a woman. And you work, ladies, hand in hand with God. You are God-like. You join spirit and flesh together. This whole plan does not work without you, and you literally hold humanity in your arms. That is your primary job, and we know how important that is because we can see how strong Satan's been fighting against the very concept of motherhood for generations. We only need to turn the TV on for 5 minutes and see what's happened to the majesty of womanhood and of motherhood and how that's become secondary or third to somebody else's outlook on life. But that's, I mean, even Christ had a mother. Even Christ was held by somebody and nursed and trained and taught by somebody, and that was his mother. Now, I've been all over the world as a soldier and as a cop. And I've had people die in my arms, men, women, and children of different cultures and different languages and different religions. And almost without fail, if that person who's dying from wounds or sickness or whatever, if they're conscious and lucid enough and they understand what's happening and they start realizing they're going to transition into the next phase of their creation, of their existence, and they're scared and they need comfort and reassurance from a power that a man can't give. And they realize that whatever techniques and training I possess, I'm not going to stop from what's happening, that they're going to die. When they get to that point, almost without fail, these people will cry out for one of two people in their life. They'll cry out for their God or for the single most important female in their life, their wife or their mother. That is where the psyche of humanity holds women. When you boil it down, when you get down to the carbon, that is where the psyche of man holds you, that they equate you with God, that only their mom, their wife, or their God is going to be able to comfort them at that point. So that should tell you, ladies that are listening to this podcast, how important you are to this plan. Please never forget the majesty that's inside of you. that you are godlike. You are the only creature in all of the things that God had created that was strong enough to contain this power. And he put in you this opportunity to join spirit and flesh, to work hand in hand with him. And we see the outcome of a good woman. What she's able to do is raise a righteous generation. And that righteous generation saved them from destruction. And that's what you're being asked to do today, is prepare this generation that is going to prepare this earth for the second coming of Christ. It's time for us to become a covenant-keeping people again, to remember what's important, and to put our children on the footing that they need to be on for what's coming.
Yeah, that's absolutely well said. Well said, Jason. That is so powerful. We have a tendency not to give the women in our lives enough credit for what they're doing, but they literally changed the course of this entire series of wars. This entire war by just having 2,000 out of all of the Nephite armies. Just 2,000 of these young men were enough to basically. Not only did they help with the actual battles, but I mean, think of the moral encouragement that they gave the Nephite armies.
Yep.
You know, when they were hearing people like Helaman and so forth, you know, recounting their courage, their bravery, but also just their effectiveness in war in these battles.
How would that change your outlook if you heard that these 14-year-old boys were more brave than you are?
Step it up.
Yeah. Step it up, buddy. You got this child over showing you up, right?
Yeah.
And then none of them die. I don't know if we're getting to that. We're going to kind of running fast and loose with the time here, but
yeah,
none of them die. Do we even comprehend that? I mean, it's fun to read about, yay, but back then there was no penicillin, there was no helicopters, there was no surgical hospitals, there was no rehab centers. Mm-hmm. If you got a serious wound, you were going to die, whether either on the battlefield or from the infections or the diseases in camp. It was not a pretty way to go. And every single one of them had been wounded. Every single one of them had a pointy object inserted into their bodies to create a traumatic wound.
Yeah. So.
And none of them died.
Which shows the miraculous nature of this too. You know, when you trust in God, God will provide. I mean, he doesn't always save everyone, you know, but in this particular case, because of their faith and because it was God's will, they every one of them survived their wounds, and
they earned that gift. They earned that gift the hard way.
Yep. Yeah, so that's in verse 56. He says, "But behold, to my great joy, there had not one soul of them fallen to the earth. Yea, they had fought as if with the strength of God. Yea, never were men known to have fought with such miraculous strength, and with such mighty power did they fall upon the Lamanites, that they did frighten them, and for this cause did the Lamanites deliver themselves up as prisoners of war." I mean, it's just awesome. These guys were like, whoa.
I'm a big, strong guy, and I've used tremendous amounts of strength to have to apprehend drug dealers and murderers and fight the Taliban. I can't even imagine seeing a 15-year-old with the strength of, may I quote the prophet, of God in battle. You know, that's incredible. And that's what's waiting for this generation, is that same promise that you will have. And I believe earlier he calls them that they fought with the strength of dragons.
Yeah.
Then he describes this battle that they fought with the strength of a God. Yep. You know, that is a prophet who is trying in his humble way to describe what he's seen. And the only words that he can use to describe seeing these 14 and 15-year-old boys is they fought with the strength of God.
Yeah.
That's a type and shadow for us today, what our children are capable of doing if we plan and prepare and head them off in the right direction.
That's right. That's right. So Alma chapter 57, basically it's Helaman. He recounts the capture of Antipara. Then they capture the city of Kumenai and so forth. Then he's talking about that. Then he's talking about the amazing preservation of the lives of these 2,000. He calls them sons at this point in time. Gidry tells the losing of prisoners. Then Alma chapter 58, Helaman tells of their need for support, that they are not getting the kind of support that they are needing, and that the government is having some issues with that. Then Helaman captures Manti. And again, this is on the western front there, and then Helaman trusts also in God. I'm just kind of going through these really fast because we're going way over on the time here. All right, and then we get down to the Mormon basically takes a few minutes and talks about his abridgment in chapter 59. The Nephites lose the city of Nephihah, and then we have Moroni's famous epistle to Governor Pehoran, and I wanted to get to that real quick. So his famous epistle here. So set us up. What's going on here, Jason?
All right. So, unbeknownst to Moroni, the kingmen have taken the city of Zarahemla and they've kicked Pehoran out of the judgment seat, and they're taking over. So he's not able to organize supplies and more reinforcements to go to the front.
Right. Remember that Zarahemla is their capital city. This is their main place. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like Washington D.C. for those of us that live in the United States. That Antifa, let's just put that, Antifa has now kicked Trump out of office, and Antifa is now running the show. So it's going to be like the autonomous zone in
Seattle,
yeah. But nationwide. So have fun with that. And so Moroni is not aware of this. All he knows is there's no support. That Helaman is suffering, Teancum is suffering, all their men are suffering because there's no support, there's no backup, there's no food. So he gets really upset and he writes a letter or an epistle to the chief judge of the land. Now, the chief judge is kind of like what the president of the United States is. He's the chief elected official responsible for the management of the entire country, kind of like the president of the United States.
Yep.
So the general of the army writes the letter to the president of the United States and says, if you don't start supporting freedom, I am going to raise insurrections. Those are actual words that he uses. I'm going to raise insurrections, and I'm going to come to you with a portion of my army, and I'm going to kick you out. And I'll put somebody in a place that loves liberty more than life itself.
We'll take you down.
Can you imagine what would happen if a general wrote that kind of letter to the president of the United States today? A bunch of guys in black SUVs would show up. He'd get whisked off to Guantanamo Bay, and you'd never see him again, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, but
the courage. Moroni didn't care anymore. He was so fed up that one, he had to deal with the kingmen. Now he doesn't get any supplies. Now he's got Lamanites all over the place. He is so fed up and so tired of the bloodshed and the horror that he just unloads on these guys. And he doesn't mince words. He says, I'm coming for you. And the sword of justice is hanging over you. Yeah. And if I have to, I'll start a guerrilla war. I'll start insurrections. But I will topple this corrupt government. He thinks that they're corrupt because they're not giving them any support. He says, I'll topple this corrupt government and we'll put it back into place. He doesn't say he'll take over. Yeah. That's another thing about Moroni. Yeah. He never says, I'll take over.
He's not trying to take over the government. He's trying to put it back to what it was.
Put it back to where it was. Back
the reign of the judges.
We actually followed God's laws. And we had honest and just men and women leading this place. So he sends this letter off.
And then we get, of course, the famous reply. Before we get that, he actually here in chapter 60, verse 23, he has this whole series of questions that he's asking Pehoran. Anyway, so he says, for do ye suppose that the Lord will still deliver us while we sit upon our thrones and do not make use of the means which the Lord has provided for us? Yea, will we sit in idleness while we are surrounded with thousands of those, yea, and tens of thousands, who do also sit in idleness, while there are thousands around about in the borders of the land who are falling by the sword, yea, wounded and bleeding? Do ye suppose that God will look upon you as guiltless while ye sit still and behold these things? Behold, I say unto you, nay. Now I would that ye should remember that God has said that the inward vessel should be cleansed first, and then shall the outer vessel be cleansed. And now except ye do repent of that which ye have done, and begin to be up and doing, and send forth food and men unto us, and also unto Helaman, that he may support those parts of the country which he has regained, and that we may also recover the remainder of our possessions in these parts. Behold, it will be expedient that we contend no more with the Lamanites until we first cleanse our inward vessel, yea, even the great head of our government. I mean, this is a direct threat to him. Either you send support or we're coming after you.
Yeah.
But what he doesn't know is there's already insurrection going on with these kingmen, these ones that don't want the traditional, what the people had actually put into place with the reign of judges. Instead, they want to have their own guys be put into power.
Now, I've had people complain to me that said Moroni acted rationally or irrationally, and he was wrong for what he did.
Yep.
That means that you don't understand the warrior perspective, the warrior outlook, or the cost that he's had to bear to get to this point. That everything that you read up to here, you haven't even taken, you can't put it into context. That what he's going through, tens of thousands of people are dying in front of him. And it isn't far away. They're dying right in front of him, in the blood and in the mud. This is horror at its most primal level. And he is tired of it. And he's tired of the double talk. He's tired of the political games. He's tired of the people not supporting freedom while his men are dying to give them that right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, not like a politician, not like somebody that's worried about offending somebody's fragile sense of self-worth, like a warrior, he sends this epistle because it needs to be said, and he's not afraid of the outcome anymore.
Yeah. He also said this is an interesting thing. Tells you a little bit about his relationship with God. In verse 33, he says, "Ye know that ye do transgress the laws of God, and ye do know that ye do trample them under your feet. Behold, the Lord saith unto me," so who's talking to him? He said, the Lord's telling me, quote, "If those whom ye have appointed your governors do not repent of their sins and iniquities, ye shall go up to battle against them," unquote. And then he closes his letter, says, "I'm Moroni, your chief captain. I don't seek for power, but I want to pull it down. He says, I seek not for honor of the world, but for the glory of my God and the freedom and welfare of my country." So he has the right purpose for what he's trying to do here in pulling down those who would have power and so forth. And of course, then we get, go ahead.
Again, that's a clue for us today. Who should we elect? Who should we send to Washington or to the local state house? Somebody that absolutely doesn't want it. Somebody that doesn't want the power. Somebody that doesn't want the prestige. Somebody that considers it a sacred duty and honor to serve, not an employment opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
We need to find Moronis again. We need to find Teancums again, or we're going to lose it all. We're going to be the third Christian culture that's been destroyed because we refuse to do what's right.
Yeah. And I love that last part. He says that his main purpose is for the glory of his God, so that basically they could live their religion, and the freedom of his people, so he wants this liberty, right? But he also says he's concerned for the welfare of his country. I think that is one of the really important things. I know there's a lot of people who really hate this whole "Make America Great Again" thing. But this is a person who, this shows a person who wants to basically, he's concerned for the welfare of his country. He's tired of the country getting ripped off by other countries and paying way more than their fair share for policing the world and all this kind of stuff, and putting down the powers of evil that are around the world. And I think that's really a fascinating aspect of the Book of Mormon here.
Right. And here are the words of a prophet of God describing Captain Moroni. "If all men were like unto Captain Moroni, the devil would have no power." And how does Captain Moroni act? Fearless. He doesn't care for power or glory. He wants to pull it down. He cares for the welfare of his family, for the welfare of his country, and for the honor of his God. And that's it.
Yep.
That's why he does what he does.
Not for power, and not for glory, and not to rise himself up or to get a huge paycheck at the end of his life, or a huge pension. This is all about what's the right thing for the country. So then we get, of course, Governor Paharon's reply to Moroni, and this is a guy who's been going through it. He's like, he's apologetic, but he basically tells it like it is. The reason why we're not sending you stuff isn't because we don't want to. It's because these dang kingmen are causing all kinds of havoc in our society, in our civilization. And we can't do it because they've taken over these different areas of our civilization, our culture, and so basically he more or less just says I don't joy in receiving your letter asking for help. He says but bottom line is we need help. So he finishes up his letter basically by saying, "Tell them to fear not, for God will deliver them, yea, and also those who stand fast in the liberty wherewith God has made them free. And now I close my epistle to my beloved brother Moroni. So we can tell that he is also, he fears in God. Basically, he believes in God, and he believes that God can actually help them. But right now, he's powerless because of this intrigue that's been going on by these kingmen trying to overthrow the traditional government that they had set up originally with the reign of the judges. So we get to chapter 62. So what happens here? Go ahead, Jason.
So basically, Moroni goes back and meets up with Pahoran. They organize, and as they march back to Zarahemla, they gather more forces, and they end up fighting the kingmen.
Yep.
And putting Pontius, their leader, to death, and killing a lot of them, and compelling the rest to either support them or die by the sword.
And then they had a trial for
Yep.
Pontius. And anyway, so that was pretty much the end of that whole situation. So they put down the kingmen. Now they can actually get back to actually fighting the Lamanites.
So Pahoran joins Moroni. He makes sure that supplies are sent out to Helaman, and he joins Moroni, and they march this grand army that they have organized to head towards the final battle with the Lamanites.
All right. Now it's also in this chapter that our friend Tiancum, man, fearless guy that he is.
Yep.
What happens to him in this chapter?
Well, I and Tiancum are pushing the army in one direction. Moroni's pushing the army in the other, and they all converge at the city of Mulek. So the Lamanite army has been defeated and pushed back from city to city, and they've been chasing them through the hills and the valleys and whatnot, and they finally all converge in the city of Mulek. So Moroni's army is completely exhausted. They're wiped out. So he comes to the decision that they're not going to make any plans to deal with the people in the city of Mulek, and he tells his army to stand down. Tiancum, in his righteous indignation, realizes that he has the enemy on their heels, and right now is not the time to give them the opportunity to regain their footing, to build the defenses. He needs to continue striking, continue moving forward. So he takes it upon himself to sneak over to the walled city of Mulek, the armed and walled city of Mulek, and he sneaks over the walls. However he does that, shameless plug, it's in my book. Mm-hmm. If you guys want an interesting read, how all that takes place. And then it actually says that he took a cord and went from place to place looking for the king. Now, what's interesting about that is, why would you need a cord or a length of rope?
Yeah. Well, somehow to get over the wall, he could have used it to basically wrap around somebody's neck to keep them from making noise.
Or he could have gone from rooftop to rooftop using that rope to avoid the guards that are down on the bottom. Because this was a giant city, and he might have used those cords to go from place to place, trying to find where the king was.
Yep. But apparently he must not have been able to get quite as close to the king, because he ended up having to, this time he had to cast his javelin at the king.
Cast it. So that tells you that he wasn't as close as he wanted to get. He either for whatever reason, there were too many guards, he was wounded himself, he made a noise, he bumped into something, whatever it was, he couldn't place that javelin right where he wanted it, so he had, instead of stabbing him overhead, he had to cast it. And again, in my book, a little creative descriptions about what might have happened at that point. But Amron is able to call out to his guards and alert his guards that there's an intruder, and he just got stabbed. So Tiancum takes off running through the city. The guards chase after him. They eventually catch him, and they kill him. Now, what's interesting is Moroni and Lehi find out that Tiancum's been killed. So that means that either they released the dead body back to the Nephites, or they displayed him in some way. But Moroni and Lehi found out that Tiancum had been killed, and that is the catalyst to get Moroni all charged up. He eventually takes his army. They take over the city of Mulek, and they finally are able to disperse the Lamanite army out of their lands.
Yeah, I love how he says that. And this is in verse 37. He says that he is a true friend to liberty, and he has suffered very many exceedingly sore afflictions. So this is a guy that had seen a lot of action. He had been a valiant warrior, and in this particular case, it didn't work out for him. But he still was successful in his design, basically to take him out. Right?
Of all the people that Mormon read about, he had all the records. He had all the Nephite records, all the Lamanite records, all the Jaredite records, and all the records they brought over with them from the old world. And he said, of all the people I've read about, of all the people you could study and learn about, there's this one guy, Captain Moroni, if all men were like, and there's this Teancum guy who is a true friend to liberty. They're the only two people that get qualified in all of this work of Scripture. And they're both soldiers. So that should tell you something about the mindset of the guy that wrote this book.
Yeah, exactly. So that really has just a lot of there's so much stuff in these chapters. Okay, so we need to kind of finish up a couple of things here. So we got Paharan returns back; he's put back on the judgment seat. Helaman returns to actually going out and preaching. I love this. These are military generals and so forth. These military men. But what they really want to do, they want to go out and preach the gospel. They really want to go out and help people to learn more about Christ and to know Him, and to because ultimately that's the best route for peace and freedom is to teach people the gospel.
Yep.
It's that's a powerful lesson here, and so many of these good Book of Mormon leaders, these military leaders, wanted to really just go out and preach the gospel. I think that's pretty powerful. Now, in chapter 63, we talk about Hagoth, and he builds ships and takes Nephites to the north. I have a whole presentation about this. I don't think we're going to have time to really go through this presentation, though, folks. But I'll just say this, and that is that when it comes down to Hagoth, we really don't know a lot about him. What we do know, they came out of Zarahemla. They went to the land which was northward. If Zarahemla is basically where Nauvoo is in that general area there on the Mississippi River, if they go northward, they're going to find themselves basically somewhere around what is today Lake Michigan. And I want to bring up a couple of things here. If you wouldn't mind, Jason, you could cover. Let's see. It came to pass, verse 5 of chapter 63. While I grab this other material here.
And it came to pass that Hagoth, he being an exceedingly curious man, therefore he went forth and built him an exceedingly large ship on the borders of the land Bountiful by the land Desolation, and launched it forth into the West Sea by the narrow neck which led into the land northward.
Yep. It's in the West Sea by the narrow neck of land, which was in the land northward. So I'm going to bring up a screen here. This is actually showing the Great Lakes as they are basically today. So you have the Sea West. If you take a look at this the area here, let's see if you can see my cursor here. If Zarahemla is basically about down in this area here, then if they go northward, they actually follow the Illinois River up here up to the Sea West. Okay, then from Sea West. Then you have that's basically Lake Michigan. Up here is Lake Superior. This is Lake Huron, Lake Erie right here, and then you have Lake Ontario here. If they come up to this general area here, you say, well, where's this narrow neck of land that was close to this area where there was the West Sea? But we need to understand a few things here. I'm going to go through a couple of slides really fast. This is all in the DVDs and other places online on the Book of Mormon Evidence streaming site. We have several different presentations that talk about this information. But essentially, we know that the Great Lakes were about 50 feet higher back in the time frame of the Book of Mormon. We know that from several different reasons, but we don't have time to go into the details on that. But especially the upper Great Lakes, the lake levels were about 50 feet higher. That had quite an effect on the actual the extent of these lakes. So this is going to be kind of an idea of what that might have looked like as you add 50 feet. The first one was 25 feet. This would be 50 feet. So that actually, because the area there is so flat, if Lake Erie had 50 more feet of water in it, it would actually expand it out way down into what is now currently Ohio. Now there's also, this is just talking about one of the escarpments. There's a couple of it. That's the Niagara escarpment that goes in between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. That's where the this is one of the issues that we've had to deal with. If Haygoth, basically what we're seeing is that Haygoth left essentially from right in this general area, the southern part of Lake Michigan. They built a ship, they left, they sailed north. Now, interestingly enough, if they start off from down in this area, there's only one direction they can go. They can't go south. They can't really go very far east or west, so there's really the only direction they can really go is north. As they go north, they're going to come up into this area up here. They're going to connect into Lake Huron. Now, Lake Superior drains into Lake Huron, and so does Lake Michigan. But Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are actually the same level. They are the same height as far as an elevation. They're technically they're the same lake, but because of this area right here by Mackinac Island, it gets really thin there, so they consider it to be two separate lakes. But over here, you have this other area here. This is just a different show. This is what it's looking like here today. This is a topographic relief map of the Great Lakes region, and you can see if you add in the extra 50 feet of water, this is what the Great Lakes would expand into this general idea. Now, so if we take a look at the overall thing here, going back to this, okay. So you have this area here is the what they call the Great Black Swamp. There was also on the other side over here in Lake Michigan, there was an area called the Grand Kankakee Marsh that extended down this direction and actually created an area here, a narrow neck, if you will, of about 20 miles, 25 miles wide between the Great Black Swamp over here and the Grand Kankakee Marsh over here. If they put in right here and they went up this direction, then they came back about a year later, according to the account. They built more ships and they left again. Now, right now, to get out to the ocean, then Haygoth would have had to come around through Lake Huron, down into Lake Erie, over here into Lake Ontario, and there's a big problem here. The problem is they would have to go over this thing called Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls would be very hard on a ship. so that's not a very, very good explanation of how we got out of here. So let me go down to a different...
Well, is that assuming the Niagara Falls was there before the earth changed when Christ came to the American continent?
Yeah, that's another thing that I address in my DVD set called the Book of Mormon Evidence number 2, actually, which is this set here. I actually go into the details about the destruction and triumph of Christ's death. That destruction was a pretty monumental thing for the Nephites, but it wasn't a worldwide event. No other civilizations at the time mentioned things happening other than the veil in the temple got rent in Jerusalem, so we know there's an earthquake in Jerusalem. But there wasn't tidal waves that took out huge cities and so forth. It was an event that was pretty much geared for just the Nephites. We believe it was an event on the new Madrid seismic zone, which we're going to get into that, folks, when we get into 3rd Nephi. We're going to tell you all about that. It's really pretty fascinating stuff. But let me go back into this area here. Haygoth, I'm just going to point out just a couple of maps. Again, this is all in these DVDs, so you can see here what is kind of going on here. Essentially, when these lakes were higher in elevation, they now know that the upper Great Lakes, basically Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, and Lake Huron, actually drained through this other bay over here, and then actually went out this direction into the Ottawa River Basin, then over here past Montreal and out to the St. Lawrence Seaway, basically, and then out to the Atlantic Ocean. The reason why it doesn't go that way now is because over the course of time, you have had a situation where you've had this whole area was under compression because of the giant glaciers from the last what they call the Little Ice Age. It actually compresses the land down. As that ice melted off, the land has been rising slowly up. When you had the 50 feet difference in height of those lakes, and then it was compressed down, it actually caused the lakes basically to go through. Let me show you here. This is the general area here. So kind of looking up at this. This is, now you can see over here on the left-hand side is the eastern bay of Lake Huron. There's a river there called the French River. It's actually a series of swamps today, but there's very, very little change in elevation. But it goes up to this place called Lake Nipissing, which is right in this general area here. Lake Nipissing sits on a continental divide area, And so any water, any rain that falls on the city of North Bay, which is on the eastern side of Lake Nipissing, actually, if it falls on the eastern side, that rain will actually go into the Ottawa River Basin. But if it falls on the western side over in the Lake Nipissing, it will go through the French River now down into Lake Huron. When this was all compressed before, though, this actually would run the other direction, and we know from the Canadian Department of Natural Resources that they believe that the Upper Great Lakes, for probably centuries, actually drained through the Ottawa River Basin, carving it out, which is the reason why that canyon is so huge in comparison with what it should be if it was just the current river that goes through there. So there's much more to that. This is the French River going through Lake Nipissing. You can see some of the swampy area that goes on there. So that would actually go through North Bay and then out to the St. Lawrence Seaway through Ottawa and over here. And the bottom line is that they end up then in the Haygoth and his people would actually end up then in the St. Lawrence Seaway, which dumps into the Atlantic Ocean. So how do they get to Polynesia? Well, once you get out to the ocean, where can you not go? There's no place you can't go. You can go easily to Polynesia. We have some evidence that they may have actually gone to Europe first before they went to Polynesia. But there's some other. That's another conversation for another day. Okay, so let's go out of that, and let's jump into. Okay, now we're into basically the Book of Helaman. By the way, if you want to know more information about that, you can go to the Book of Mormon Evidence streaming site. We actually have Wayne May and I both talk about this Haygoth information, and it's just absolutely fascinating when you see the actual research that's gone into this and how it actually everything works out from non-Mormon sources. It's just absolutely beautiful. Then let's see, in the Book of Helaman, it says this is in chapter 1. You have the trial of Paankai, and you have Paharan is murdered by Kishkumen. You want to talk about that at all?
Sorry.
Paharan he was murdered by Kishkumen. That was that. There's too much stuff here, Jason.
I know, too much good stuff.
Too much good stuff. Listen, Jason, thank you so much for taking your time to talk about this these chapters, these war chapters. We are so grateful for your expertise and your knowledge about how this all can be seen much more in depth when you understand it from a warrior's perspective.
I appreciate the opportunity, Rod, and there is so much in there for people to learn and to study, and I just pray that people will open up the Book of Mormon again, read it with an open heart and an open mind, take everything into content and context, and try to have that learning experience that Christ wants us to have when we have that relationship with the Holy Ghost and we're reading these stories, that we can start relating them to our own lives, because the Book of Mormon was written for us today as a blueprint and a manual for us on how we need to prepare ourselves so that we can prepare this earth for the second coming of Christ. You bet.
So we're going to have to. So we'll have more information about Helaman coming up here shortly. So just bear with us on that. This has gone really long. We understand that, but please don't. Hopefully you're getting some great information from this, and we're looking forward to further information here in the Book of Mormon. We want to encourage you again to go to bookofmormonevidence.org for information and to be able to find links to all these different kind of places. We're working on a video that will show a lot of the different materials that are available in the bookstore and which things you can find and which items. We have so many exciting projects that are going on here, and I hope that you'll keep joining us here for the next one, which is going to be Helaman chapters 1 through 6, and we'll get that taken care of. We'll hopefully have Jason be able to join us again and finish that up here. He's got to take off right now. We've got tough schedules here. Thank you again, Jason. Appreciate your help.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about my books, you can go to warchapters.com. My books can be found in Deseret Book on Amazon. You can get them off of my website. Again, it's a historical fiction about what we just talked about. It's no scripture referencing. It is just the pure story of Captain Moroni and the war chapters in the Book of Mormon from a warrior's perspective.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jason. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.
We're excited to announce the 26th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, September 25th and 26th, with special guests Glenn Beck, Tim Ballard, and David Barton. and you can watch from any device. Tickets can be found at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com. If you'd like to learn more about Jason Mao and his books, please go to thewordchapters.com. One mother said, "The most amazing story and posters to hit me and my kids' lives. Love the entire idea behind it. Thank you. I had such a fun time explaining Moroni in more detail to my children than ever before. It's inspiring."